Good evening and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting on April 1st. I'd like to start by acknowledging this meeting takes place in the traditional and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. Number 3, additions, deletions to the agenda. We do have one addition. We'll make it 8.4, update on the sale of the lot of land on Upper Hall Street for the purpose of relocating Harbourview Haven. So our CAO will update us later on in the meeting. Is everybody okay with that addition? Okay. So, yeah, go ahead and move it.
Sorry. I'll make the motion that we add to the agenda an item 8.4 with regard to an update on a sale of land on Hall Street.
So move the deputy mayor. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Strong. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, motion carry unanimous. Approval of the agenda, recommendation that the Committee of the Whole approve the agenda for April 1st, 2025 with the additions as presented. Is there a mover? Moved by Councillor Daphne, seconder by Councillor Fullerton. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, motion carried unanimous. Approval of the minutes, 4.1. Recommendation that Committee of the Whole approve the minutes from the March 4th, 2025 meeting as presented. Is there a mover? Councillor Babineau, is there a seconder? Councillor Strong, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Motion carried unanimous. Now, before we go on to presentations, I just want to make one announcement that we're going to re-advertise for the volunteer awards over the next, say, week or so. The ads closed today or Friday, but we have very few people that have put their names forward for groups. So remember, all community groups, all volunteer-based groups should nominate someone from your committee and get their names forward so we can actually honor them later on this month. And then we pick one of those people that are nominated to be volunteer of the town for the year. So if you know anybody out there that or know any committees, spread the word because we had very, very few applicants. So it'd be great to get some interest in that. So again, that's just something I wanted to. Councillor Strong?
What are the conditions of that application? Do you have to be a resident of the town of Lunenburg to be nominated?
No, you don't. It's we've had people like Social Minor Hockey have nominated people that aren't from this, like don't live in this town, but they're involved in a group that represents the kids of this community. So yeah, no, you don't have to actually live in the community, in the town. Yeah, the one that wins the volunteer of the year for the town of Lunenburg obviously does because it's the town of Lunenburg's volunteer of the year. But if you want to, like the Board of Trade usually nominates somebody, they don't necessarily have to live in the town, or curling club, any organization can nominate it. We usually have 12 to 15 people at least with their families at the event at the end of the month. So it'd be nice to be able to have some people put their names forward. So now I'll move on to 6.1. And we have a presentation by Pride and Allyship, Lunenburg County Pride.
Hi, folks. I'm going to pass some things out for an activity during the presentation. So take one and pass it down. So we have a few housekeeping slides before I begin. So first, these two aspects are very different and usually have two very different slides. We wanted to make our slide deck cohesive across all municipal units, and due to time and slide constraints at councils, we've combined these. So just as a note, they're very different, very individual. First, we want to acknowledge that we're doing this learning in Spaganagity, one of the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq. This is unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. It's covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which were signed between the Mi'kmaq and the Maliseet people and the British Crown in 1725. The treaties established the rules in which were supposed to be an ongoing relationship between nations. And as treaty people, we are all responsible under these treaties. So our call to action related to our land acknowledgement is that after this, you take some time to learn about the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq, as well as the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and see how you might be able to influence some of the progress and the calls to action as municipal unit councillors. And then prior to moving on, we want to recognize the rich and historic and continuous contributions, histories, and legacies African Nova Scotians in Mi'kma'ki have made. African descendants have often contributed to the infrastructure and economic wealth of towns, but due to hate, discrimination, we're often not able to benefit from those contributions. Related to our community recognition, we encourage you folks to learn more about the historic and continuous legacies of African Nova Scotians to Mi'kma'ki through visiting the Loyalist Center in Shelburne, Africville, or the Black Cultural Center. Okay. This is one of our final housekeeping slides. So you'll see the agenda on this one side of what we're going to cover. Before I begin, as we present, we all are doing learning. Even myself will be learning and unlearning through doing these presentations with council. What you have in front of you is a piece of yarn, jersey net yarn. When you have a moment where you think you're going to have to do some learning after this, or maybe do some unlearning, tie a knot in it. We will have to untangle the knots that we have to continue to move forward. If we're using knitting, you're not able to knit if there's a knot in your wool. So we want to allow space for making mistakes and untangling those knots. As well, that Q word. That Q word is the word queer. As you may see in our communities, we do use that word quite openly for our community. It's being reclaimed because it hasn't been medicalized or criminalized in history, but it has been used historically as a slur. And a lot of our older gay population do not feel comfortable with the usage of the term queer. I myself identify as a queer woman because for me, that word transcends the umbrella term gay. But I'm also very conscientious going into spaces about who may be harmed by this word. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to try my best to, instead of using the word queer, use the term gay as an umbrella term for the community. So to set the stage on Pride and on the gay community, we felt like it was important to give a highlight of the acronym we use as Lunenburg County Pride that you see, because language is always changing. We know that the 2S LGBTQIA plus community encompasses a wide spectrum of identities and experiences. I like to picture the spectrum as the image on the left. It's not just linear, but it's also has multitudes. Before diving in and to respect time, what we've decided to do is highlight a few of the words, the pieces of the acronym here that may be new or have important histories that may not be recognized. The first one on the top is Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit we have at the front of our acronym to recognize the Indigenous communities and Indigenous identities, no worries, that are part of the gay community. Gay identities, whether it be gender identity or sexual identity, have been a rich part of First Nations cultures for generations. And through residential schools and colonial oppression, language related to their identities have either been suppressed or there has been other homophobia, transphobia that has existed. So this term gives Indigenous people an English word to transcend over their language barriers between different First Nations culture and allows for representation. I want to highlight why lesbian comes before gay. GBT was one of the first acronyms, and then it was GLBT. But during the AIDS epidemic, lesbians were at the bedside of gay men and also donating blood because of very homophobic blood laws. And so that letter goes after 2S to honor the lesbian contributions during the AIDS epidemic. We've already touched on queer, but intersex refers to individuals whose biological sex characteristics don't fit typical male or female binary categories. So about 2% of the total population in Canada are intersex. That's about as common as red hair. And asexual, aromantic is a spectrum of little to no sexual or romantic attraction. This is included in the longer acronym to give representation to those folks that have been commonly erased from all conversations related to the gay community. And then the plus at the end lists all other identities that may not be listed because, as we know, language consistently evolves and identities that fit folks may change and shift. So, why is allyship important before we get into how you can be an ally and what allyship is? This is the part of the presentation that does shift week to week based off of the climate. Last week, I had a very hard time coming up with words for this part of the presentation with the feelings of erasure and the feelings of just being antagonized by decisions that affect representation of all equity identities. This week was a little bit airier. I want to say I can only speak about my own lived experience, so you're going to get a little story of Kay here. I am a cisgendered queer woman, and I didn't feel safe to come out until my 20s. I left Lunenburg County right after graduation because I didn't feel like I belonged here. I grew up playing soccer on the field by the arena. I volunteered with the Muffin Run, and I still felt like I needed to move away. When I came back was actually the first year that Lunenburg County Pride had their first ever Pride Parade. And I felt this amazing sense of welcome and representation. I felt seen, and I felt like I could be openly out. And that feeling of being safe and feeling like I could be out lasted for a good amount of time. But I would be lying if I said that I still feel safe. There are times where I take off my pride pin in public. I left it at home today by accident. But if I'm wearing it or wearing a pride hat, I might put it away depending on which spaces I enter, because I genuinely fear being hate crimed because of the current climate. This has only been exacerbated by actual events that have happened in the community, whether it be hate symbols being spray painted or when there was a vandalization incident and the gay community came together to say, not here, not in Lunenburg County. An individual in stealth took photos of all of the attendees and posted it online to promote hate without our knowledge, without our consent. That incident was reported to the police, but those images weren't removed. Now, when individuals make clear, loud, discriminatory statements, it impacts our safety. But I also know I'm a cisgendered, and a note on cisgendered, that means I identify as the same gender that I was assigned at birth. So the doctor said, it's a girl, and I still say, hey, I feel like a girl. But folks that are at the intersections of these identities, as you see on this little image, are at a crossroad. There's multiple paths coming at them, whether it be their race, their gender, their ability, their income. Some folks' roads may be a two-way street, maybe a one-way street. Other folks' roads may be a little bit more complex and puts them at greater risk of harm. And this is why, and this term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a wonderful scholar. But this is why allyship is so important. As I've mentioned, incidents of discrimination and harassment are increasing. There's vandalization and hate symbols occurring. Last June in Bridgewater, multiple pride symbols were stickered over with a hate symbol on private property. And it was the business owner's responsibilities to remove those symbols. We've had increased safety planning, whether it be me coming to these council meetings and thinking about how I'm walking into the building, if I'm driving myself, who knows I'm here, and who will be getting a phone call when I leave that door and I have not had an incident. To our events, and some events haven't been publicly promoted because of safety concerns. In addition, bullying to schools is an extreme worry. The most recent public data on bullying in schools from 2022-2023 shows that 51% of gay students experienced homophobia and transphobia. Only 20% of those students felt like it was treated seriously. And this is why allyship is important, because when we have good allies, we feel protected, we feel like things are being treated seriously, and we feel safe. So what is allyship? Allyship is when someone uses their power, their privilege, to stand up for someone and support someone or a group of people who are being treated unfairly. An ally listens and learns and makes things better by speaking out against unfairness and taking action to help others when they need it, which is why allyship is needed right now. What are the roles of allies? Advocating and lifting up voices. If someone in the gay community says, this isn't feeling fair, and this is why, listening and maybe amplifying that perspective if you have a chance. As counselors and folks in the town, upholding anti-discrimination work, including introducing and ensuring that anti-discrimination policies are followed. And also, if there's calls for legal protections to be removed, to stand against it. I can speak here today because a group of very proud gay folk in 1980s attended what they call in the gay community the Paper Bag March, which was in Halifax, which is why we celebrate in July. Folks marched in Halifax in the streets with their faces covered in paper bags because they could be fired for being gay. And today, I'm very thankful that those brave folks took the stand so I can speak here about how you folks can continue to work to support folks like me and others. All of this creates safe spaces, but also thinking about the spaces you create, whether it be asking for folks for their pronouns, or allowing folks to opt out so that they don't have to out themselves if they're not out with pronouns. Or, having pride flags flown for the Trans Day of Visibility. Being a good ally is hard. Some of the steps you can take is listening, as I did mention. Hear the personal stories of gay folks in your community. When you hear homophobic, transphobic, or other discriminatory comments, stand up against it. Make a clear voice that it's not welcome. And take time to educate yourself. We're constantly learning and unlearning. I'm constantly learning ways to be better for my own community as well as other communities. And then advocate for equity. One of the ways you can do this is when you're making decisions, ask whose voice is at the table. Do you have a voice of the community that is being most impacted greatly? And then when you're working to create safe spaces, again, pronoun usage, looking at how the space is designed as well. And being a good ally has many hurdles, and it's okay to trip. What's most important is that you make the efforts, because an imperfect effort is better than no effort at all. It's an ongoing commitment, which means, yeah, you might get really tired of advocating, but making sure you take that time for yourself to be well and then continuing forward, embracing your mistakes, learning from them. And again, reminding yourself that an imperfect action is much better than none at all. And there is further learning. So some suggested reading, Hijab Butch Blues, Allies, Real Talk About Showing Up, Screwing Up, and Trying Again, Trans Allyship Workbook. Read this to get smarter about race, class, gender, disability, and more. And How Do They Them, a visual guide. If you're a memoir reader, my personal favorite on this list is Hijab Butch Blues. It is a beautiful memoir, very sad memoir, about a person who is a newcomer who is experiencing colorism within their own community and racism within their own community, and who is part of the Muslim community and who is queer. Suggested listening, if maybe you're like, I'm not a reader. Gender Reveal and Outward podcasts are highly recommended. And if you are someone that learns by stories and films, the National Film Board of Canada has some great options. The first one here is First Stories, Two-Spirited. It is about a two-spirited person and the discrimination they have as being two-spirited and gender nonconforming at powwow, and how there's still work to reclaim those identities that were historically in those spaces. Into the Light is about a parent who is supporting their trans child in the remote north of Canada, about being an ally for their child. And I Am Skylar is actually from Nova Scotia. It's about a trans youth in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and their experiences. So this presentation, thank you so much. It's been really about setting a foundation of why allyship is important and some tangibles for moving forward. So if you have any questions, I would open the floor now to those.
Any questions from my counselors? Counselor Fullerton?
Not a question per se, but a comment and a link that I can give you to another project that I'm involved with, which is along the same lines of what you're talking about.
Yeah, we would absolutely love that link.
Okay.
Our email is lunenburgpride@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Anybody else? Deputy Mayor?
No question, Kay. I just want to say thank you so much for coming and doing this. It's I've known her since she's been knee-high on the sidelines of soccer fields and then playing. And, I had no idea, honestly, what you were going through. So it's really powerful to hear it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, Kay, I've known you since you've been this big as well. And I just want to thank you so much for coming here tonight and presenting this and, basically passing along what you've been experiencing and I guess sort of apologize for the way the world is in 2025. I honestly can't believe that it's going the way it is, but social media certainly hasn't helped the rhetoric whatsoever. It's an easy place for people to hide. The keyboard warriors are just that on the keyboard. And, I guess the rhetoric that we're hearing from down south of us isn't helping at this time either. So again, on behalf of myself and the citizens of Lunenburg, I apologize if you've ever experienced anything here in town. We try to make all our events, they are all inclusive. And if you ever have experienced anything negative at Canada Day, any of our town events, come to any one of us and we'll make sure that'll be taken care of immediately through the proper channels. Because again, I can't believe in 2025, we're actually sitting here discussing this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just a note on that as well, very appreciative of the support that you folks have given during this presentation, knowing that we can come to you. I forgot to mention, we're doing this presentation at all of the municipal units based off of a request of a person on one of those municipal unit councils about wanting to have a foundation of why allyship was important. So we're coming to all of them and we're very appreciative for this time to speak about it because as you mentioned, the rhetoric from down south, but also Canadian voices that have large platforms and other folks that are Canadian who have very vocal platforms and voices is not helping the situation at all.
No, thank you. The one thing that I'll take from what you told us about in the 80s when they had to march with their faces covered, one nice thing is you're here today without your face covered. You can proudly speak. And a group of supposedly brave souls that were trying to push an incident on the weekend had to cover their faces. So I'd say the world has definitely flipped in your favor and they're definitely the minority. So just hold your head high and we're all here for you. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
So we have no business arising or unfinished business. So we'll move on to new business, 8.1, short-term housing information request. So we all have the report in front of us. I don't know if anyone's presenting anything or we're just opening up to the floor. What is the plan?
I'm happy to present.
Okay, excellent. Go ahead.
Okay. That's a heck of an opening act to try to follow. Really appreciated the words. With respect to short-term rentals, for the record, my name is Trevor Hume. I'm speaking to you tonight as planner for the town. It's my pleasure to present to you a brief information report on short-term rentals. Many of you may remember that this comes from a council request made almost a year ago. We like to be a little bit more responsive as staff, but there's been a few things that have happened in the last year. But just to refresh everybody's memory as to what the motion was that I'm addressing this evening, it was to prepare a comprehensive report on the town's responsibilities and options concerning short-term housing. The report should address potential taxing and zoning options and an evaluation of both positive and negative impacts of short-term housing within the town of Lunenburg. So I won't read the whole report. It's not too long. I assume you all have, but I'll hit the highlights. I think it's important to note, though, when we're talking short-term rental, just what we're meaning. So the province has a definition. We'll talk about that right now. It is a tourism operator, essentially, who provides accommodations, who rents to the public for 28 days in a row or less. There are 3 different types of short-term rentals in the provincial program. The first is what you would recognize as your traditional quote unquote Airbnb, primary residence, short-term rentals. So someone has a house, they want to rent it while they're not using it, and they get to do that. The second category are commercial short-term rentals. And these are categorized by the province as, again, a dwelling, but it's either a portion of a dwelling or a whole dwelling that is operated as a commercial venture. So that's not their principal residence. They've purchased the home or have this secondary unit that they're renting out for commercial purposes. And the third are our traditional tourist accommodations. Just want to point out here that the town planning documents regulate commercial traditional accommodations as its own use, as accommodations under the land use bylaw. And that's been that way for quite some time, including the previous land use bylaw. So when we're talking about short-term rentals in the context of the town of Lunenburg, we're going to eliminate all of the hotels and the inns and the bed and breakfasts from that listing, and we're only going to deal with dwellings because that is what our definition says. So our land use bylaw defines short-term rentals as the use of a dwelling unit or part thereof for commercial overnight accommodations for consecutive periods of 30 days or less, so 2 more days than the province. It may include the town. The operation of short-term rentals is also regulated, though, by the Tourist Accommodation Act. of 2019. And that makes short-term rentals also a provincially regulated industry. So what are the municipal level responsibilities then? The sections of the MPS and the LUB I just outlined represent the full set of responsibilities that everyone around this table is responsible for upholding at the moment. There are no other responsibilities that the town has to do in any way. Registration and operation of short-term rentals is regulated by the Tourist Accommodation Act, and it has nothing to do with the Municipal Government Act whatsoever. So, and that's what we operate under. We do outline a number of positive and negative aspects for short-term rentals. And I hauled a report, a quote out of the 2022 provincial housing needs assessment that was produced for the entire province. And I'll just read this because I think this might be sort of the crux of what the concern is. Short-term rentals have grown as a use of residential dwelling space for temporary accommodations that blurs the line between rental housing and commercial hospitality. Alongside this market, growth is concern about the impact of STR units on traditional residential markets, the market sector, specifically whether STRs are removing homes from the market, reducing supply, and increasing the difficulty for households to find suitable places to live. So staff have included a list of very general positive and negative impacts. This is an area of research that is ongoing. I think it's fair to say pretty much every jurisdiction across Nova Scotia is looking at this issue in one way or another. We have access to very little data here in the town of Lunenburg. Statistics Canada and CMHC are two major sources of data, and they collect things at a county-wide lens. So it's really insufficient for us to understand what exactly is going on. So that is to tie things together with other initiatives we currently have on the go. I'll just remind you that the housing market data gathering project that you folks have approved through Modal will allow us to get better data on the housing market for potential use in a future update to the town of Lunenburg's housing needs assessment study, and to be able to put some better numbers on exactly what the economic impacts might be. So where are we? We are currently here. We have 53 registered short-term rentals from the provincial registry, and that's operators, not rooms, as of March 12th. So we reached out to Nova Scotia Tourism. They were good enough to give us a up-to-date listing of who is in the database. Because while we do have our municipal processes in place to give development permits for short-term rentals and things like that, the province actually maintains the tourist accommodation database, as they are responsible for regulating tourist accommodations in the province. So we give them information on permits that we have issued. They receive that information as part of application processes. The people who pass the grade get added to the list. And what that gets you is the ability to legally list your tourist accommodation on sites like Expedia, Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking.com without a provincial tourism registration number. You cannot do that. The province has that in place, that agreement in place with all of the online sites that do business in Nova Scotia. And so without getting municipal approval and that proven and that given to the province, you don't get listed on these sites. And so I have a graph on the following page. Let's do a breakdown first. before we get to that one, on operators by category. So remember, we have those three categories that the province has: commercial accommodation, traditional tourist accommodation, and whole home primary residence. The pie chart that I've provided shows that 58% of the operators fall into the traditional accommodations category. So those are already regulated by the land use bylaw and essentially can only happen in commercial zones. There are things like the hotels and inns and that sort of thing. That leaves the remaining 42% is comprised of 22 properties. Of those 22 properties that fall into what the town would call a short-term rental, 8 or 15% of the total are whole home primary residence short-term rentals, with 14, the remaining 14 represented by the 27% commercial accommodation. Those 14 are our investment properties or secondary suites or things of that nature. So in August of 2024, if this report was coming out last fall, it would read quite a bit differently. But in August of last year, the province required initially, and the deadline eventually rolled back to December of 2024. But it started in September, I believe, they announced it in August. They would be requiring this proof that you are operating your short-term rental legally and with the town's notification and permission. That push has led to a 63% reduction in the total number of short-term rentals. So in October of 2024, we had 60 in the database. We get regular lifts of the database provided to us from the province. We had 60 short-term rentals that fall into the town's definition of short-term rental. Through the licensing and registration process now requiring proof of municipal code compliance, that number has dropped to 22. So we can talk a little bit about that in a minute. I just want to finish up the requests from the original motion, so we clear those out. What authority do you folks have? The town authority is limited to the MGA in this circumstance. So we get to regulate short-term rentals like any other use. Currently, we permit them everywhere a dwelling can be found. I list the zones there. I provide a map. It's pretty much everywhere where you will find housing in the town. It's allowed. So staff have outlined a few potential areas to look at should council want to look at this issue further. And these include asking staff to investigate amending the land use bylaw to further restrict short-term rentals by limiting them to primary residences. This is a pretty common thing. That would bring, in the current context, that would bring the short-term rental number currently down to 8 in the town. You could ask staff to investigate amending the land use bylaw to further restrict short-term rentals by limiting them to commercial use zones, which would essentially just add them to the accommodations use, because that's where accommodations are allowed presently. You could ask staff to investigate instituting a short-term rental business licensing bylaw, or even better, a business licensing bylaw, not limited just to short-term rentals. Either or would be fine. But this would require registration and licensing with the town of short-term rentals and would allow for inspections and enforcement by our bylaw officer. You could also ask staff to investigate a new bylaw to place caps on the number of short-term rentals permitted within the town, perhaps through that short-term rental business licensing bylaw. So like any other land use, you cannot ban a use. You must make a provision for legal use. Short-term rentals are legal use in the province of Nova Scotia, so therefore we cannot ban them. They must be allowed to continue. It's a matter of where and how many. So I also want to briefly mention that council is also empowered to institute a marketing levy, which I know has been discussed and is in the works. Work is ongoing on that. This all ties in with our cultural tourism economic study that is ongoing, along with the extra housing data. These are all interconnected issues that sort of feed into each other. And hopefully we'll get some good information on sustainable tourism coming out of that project. And I do want to leave you on a final note here before I open it up to the questions I assume are coming. Staff note the large reduction of short-term rentals that was achieved by removing illegal or unsuitable short-term rentals through requiring proof of town bylaw compliance in the provincial short-term rental registration process. It may be advisable to pause any action on this topic while continuing to monitor the registration data. We get regular deliveries of the tourist accommodation database and revisit this issue later. As it stands currently, short-term rentals do play, and we were reminded of this from the cultural tourism economic study, actually, they actually are a component of our tourism economy in the town. And so these issues have to be weighed. We don't currently have a good feel for what the trend is in the data. We've seen a massive reduction in the number of units. Do we know that that's long-term? What's going to happen? No. People could get through doing renovations and other upgrades that are required, and next year this time we could be back with 80 short-term rentals, or we could come back with 10. We really don't know at this point. And that's why we're suggesting perhaps a pause and collect data as a way forward. And with that, I yield back here.
Thank you, Trevor. I guess I was the one that requested this back in April, a year ago. So I thank you very much for the report. And you're right, there were a lot of reasons why this wasn't brought forward sooner. But again, thank you. I guess, if I may, I have a few questions and comments more than anything. But the first question is, what is our enforcement ability if we bring in some of the recommendations that you say we can bring in? Because I can guarantee you that the short-term single dwelling family homes didn't go from 60 to 22 or to 8 like is being reported and recorded. Because if it is, I know where they all are in the town of Lunenburg, right? Because I know of at least 8 or 10. So again, how can we monitor it? Because that is the biggest issue. If we do put some rules in place, which I really feel strongly that we should, there has to be a way to monitor it. So that's, one thing I'm concerned about. I have a question that if we would limit them to just the commercial, mixed commercial or commercial zones like the other traditional, can we tax them commercially if they are a business? Because I'm not sure how anyone can tell me they bought a house from Toronto in Lunenburg, never been to Lunenburg, rent the house out for 5 months of the year for 3 days at a time, how that's not a business, right? So are we allowed to tax them commercially? I'm mainly concerned about the primary residence short-term rental. I'm not concerned about most of the others. A little bit of the commercial short-term rentals, I am disappointed to hear about a number of apartment units and condominium units in town in the last year or two that people have moved out, and rather than rent them year round, they're renting them for 5 months of the year in the summer, and they make more than they can year round. And again, I guess my big concern is every time one of these homes or condos or apartments are taken off the market, it's one less opportunity for a younger family or any family to live here in Lunenburg year round. Because the one negative impact that wasn't listed is that if we allow this to continue the way the current bylaw is written and policy is written, we will slowly watch the erosion of our community in a 12-month period. And the fact that there'll be 6 or 7 months that if 30 to 40% of your housing units are vacant, who goes to your restaurants, your stores, who's going to join the local fire departments, the local community groups? It eventually erodes your community that you don't have a community for 6 or 7 months of the year. And that's the last thing I think most of us want to see. because I will say I've read this a few times now since I've received it, and to say that we have a policy to limit short-term rentals, in my mind, the way I read the policy, is a bit of an overstatement. The policy states you can only have one short-term rental on a lot. Well, that means you can buy any house anywhere in town and turn it into a short-term rental. It doesn't have to be your primary residence, it's just a resident. And I do like what HRM has done. I think the town of Mahone Bay has just updated their land use bylaw and short-term rental policy. And I after reading this and seeing what our options are, I'd love to see us come back with, you know, some examples of Mahone Bay, HRM, some things they've done, because under town authority, in my personal opinion, and this might sound strong, but the top three, low density, medium density, and high density residentially zoned areas should have no short-term rentals if they're a business, in my opinion. If you want to have a traditional Airbnb in those areas, that's okay, because traditionally an Airbnb is a owner-occupied Airbnb, but a short-term rental is just that, it's a business. So I guess those are my comments from the report. Again, I thank you for bringing it forward, but this is something that has been eating at me long before I ever thought I'd be sitting in this chair. So thank you.
Can I address through the chair, I guess officially? So enforcement, that's a great question. You've asked actually all of the questions that I have on this. Staff, I think, would agree that it is a concern to have a use that could erode housing. While I'm elated at the numbers that we currently have, I'm not convinced that's gonna hold full term through the year. Enforcement, we have an excellent bylaw officer. And while I've made the point a couple times that tourist accommodations are a provincially regulated activity, we routinely forward complaints that we receive to other levels of government. I would encourage any resident to have a word with Shania and let her know where one of these operations may be. And what will happen is we'll check our database, see if they're legal, and if they are, hunky-dory. And if they're not, that will get forwarded to our contacts at the Tourist Accommodations Directorate under tourism, would be my suggestion. So I think we already have the mechanism there for that. We are complaint driven. We're not out patrolling. You're not out, well, for parking tickets perhaps, but not for anything else. So I would definitely encourage that to happen. We do have regular communication with the folks at the Tourist Accommodations branch and speaking to the province this morning about it actually too. So that's that piece. And while that's not a comprehensive, answer, we're not going to go out and root it all out. It is an avenue where we will take that information. As for the commercial tax, that is an interesting, what HRM have managed to do, because they have their charter, which is basically their own special version of the MGA. They don't operate under the MGA. So they have managed with their power to negotiate with the province a change to their charter, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding is they've had a charter change and a change to the Property Assessment Act of the province to allow them to tax properties commercially, as even though they're categorized as residential. So how properties are valued now under the Tax Assessment Act, PVSC send their assessors out and they look at a property, and it can be one of three things. It can be vacant, it can be residential, or it could be commercial. And the Tax Assessment Act defines what those three categories are comprised of. And so what HRM have been able to do is negotiate a separate side bit of legislation that addresses their jurisdiction only. This is my understanding, that allows them to tax a property commercially, even though it's been assessed as residential. And that is the problem here. We cannot we don't get to decide whether a building is residential or commercial under the tax assessment. That is PVSC only. So, and that's the difficulty. So, I think there's a lot of merit to looking at things like taxing commercial operations as commercial operations. And in fact, our land use bylaw acknowledges that short-term rentals are a commercial use of land within a residential zone. So you're barking up the right tree. There's just, I think it's a project beyond the ability of one town to achieve. And I suggest that if this is something that this must be a concern for other communities, and perhaps this could be an item for discussion with the NSFM to approach the province as a group to have the same equity that was shown to HRM be shown to the rest of the province.
Thanks for those answers, because I know two of us are attending the spring conference, and there'll be some of us attending the fall conference as well. So that'll be certainly something that I'll be willing to bring forward to the NSFM. And I guess the thing that I really get confused over with our land use bylaw is that if I have a property and my family's living in the property and we have a garage out back and we want to build an ensuite up top for an STR, for example, we're not allowed. And to me, that should be allowed rather than me buying the house, never coming here even to visit it, and renting the whole house out. So it's almost contradictory to eliminating the problem that we have, because there might be some people out there that need like that secondary suite for extra income, depending on how life falls, right? But we don't allow that, yet we allow people that have wealth to come here and buy multiple houses, never intend to move here, and then rent them short term as a business, as an asset, because they know 10 years from now that house is going to be worth a lot more money. They'll make more than enough money in 5 months to cover the mortgage or the taxes, and away they go. And that is definitely depleting the housing stock in what I call Newtown, where I live. I mean, there's a lot of bungalow style, what I call starter homes up where that's what they were, where I live. And a lot of them before COVID, especially, started to get bought up and turned into STRs, which I hated to see, quite frankly. Anybody else want to ask questions or comments? Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Trevor. That was, you actually answered most of my questions, but even though I was reading, like I read this today and I had, first of all, let's get to it. The cost, or the so-called, which is really a penalty, let's be real, is not that significant. It's certainly not going to increase the coffers of the town of Lunenburg, I don't think, if we have 2022. But that's just my comment on it. And it will increase it, but I still think there are ways to find out how to get around it. For example, in Halifax, people that live in the neighborhood that is regulated in the North End report to me that every household got somebody coming to the door, knocking on it, and delivered a hand piece of paper, which is paying for someone to do. And you had to identify whether you were renting it as an Airbnb. You don't even have to have it registered on the Airbnb. You just have to say what you're doing with the property, or whether you're renting it, year round. So I just don't see a huge cost benefit that is going to offset the actual on the ground situation. But then getting back to the existing town of Lunenburg regulations, the provincial statute for the 30 days would trump what we have anyway, right?
Yeah, through the chair. Theirs is actually less. It's 28 days. So ours is actually allows for, and I think they picked the shortest month, so you could rent an entire month, February, obviously. But we've made 30, and I do share the concern about taking primary residences and using them for short-term rentals. It's an issue that we need to look at to make sure we're balancing that all correctly.
I agree. We're on the same page. So just Okay, so what's slipping through the cracks? Is it just because they don't want to register with the Airbnb, or they've got that, my nephew, for example, owns a few Airbnbs that were Airbnbs, but they're in rural areas and he doesn't even have to advertise anymore. It just happens, right? So is there some way that it is slipping through the cracks, or is it a lot of people don't care about Airbnb anymore because of the things that are happening with the United States economy and Airbnb?
That's a great question. I will say this. Out of this registration process, we found out about several dozen illegal apartments that were constructed. So really, this is a broader issue of folks just not seeking permission to do things in general. So they were coming in for their short-term rental zoning letter, ironically, to say they were legal, and they had an apartment that was in their house they may have bought from somebody. Quite often, these are people second or third owners since the apartment was installed 15 years ago. But 15 years ago, no permits were pulled to put it in. So slipping through the cracks is an ongoing municipal enforcement issue. I don't think it's limited to short-term rentals. I think it's across the board with all of our regulations.
So I think that's a very positive thing. I'm sure that the fire inspector had something to do with that and sorting it out, because I do have concerns about the quality of housing that we have in the town. So that in itself, I think, is a very positive thing that's happened with this. So the provincial rules also talk about taxation in heavy tourist communities, but we don't think about that.
I'm not sure what they're meaning by that, whether it's marketing levy that they're talking about there, or exactly what they mean, or they're trying to cover the HRM situation. I could find out more about the provincial. We tend to stay out of what the province is doing, but we could clarify that if you wish.
No, that's good. I really do agree with the mayor's comment that, or your comment that we could go with this to the NSFM. I think there's more than one way to skin a cat here, but it's a bad expression, but there is power in all of the municipalities coming together to try to deal with this problem. But kudos for the building permit stuff, because I think that's really important.
Thank you, Councilor Strong. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor?
I'm much like the mayor, through the chair, am very concerned about the proliferation of short-term rentals in the community, and I feel that they have been detrimental to the town. And I've felt this way for probably 8 or so years now, and was incredibly disappointed that there wasn't stronger limitations placed on short-term rentals with the when the new land use bylaw was adopted. That was certainly the intention when while still in office previously, was to this was a wonderful opportunity to place some limitations on them, so that we were allowing more opportunity for long-term housing options in the town. And so I would very much like to see us move ahead with some of the steps that were suggested, and would even add a few more to the next steps. I really think we need to look at amending our MPS and land use bylaw to further restrict STRs. I think they need to be limited to commercial use zones, as they are a commercial use. I think that I have no problem with people renting out their primary residence as an external, as an opportunity for extra income. I see that, as the mayor mentioned as well, an opportunity for generating income from a property of citizens of ours who are long-term permanent residents, and I would not want to restrict that opportunity. But by the same token, I really am disappointed by the amount of single-family homes and now apartments that we are in desperate need of for long-term residents, and the lack of them on the market also is, markets are driven by quantity, and when there's less quantity, the price goes up. So I see it as a affordability issue as well. So I know Mahone Bay, as was mentioned as well, has recently made some changes to their regulations. Perhaps we can look at what they've done and see if there's an opportunity for a similar changes, amendments to our regulations to operate. And I don't know, you mentioned about the possibility of a short-term business licensing bylaw, and if that is a requirement, or if that would be helpful in what would be needed to provide proper enforcement and to better track that, then great. Not in favor of necessarily just increasing bureaucracy, but if a bylaw would be helpful, then by all means, and I'd love to have that looked into more thoroughly. Potentially a cap on the numbers. Previously in the old land use bylaw, there was the old-fashioned name for short-term rentals was tourist homes, or that actually, I guess that was even pre-bed and breakfasts, because the bylaw was that old. But there was, even back then, there was resistance to too many of tourist accommodations in residential areas. And so they had put, spacing requirements, and it was to address that. And now there doesn't seem to be any restriction. And I don't think it's going backwards to regaining control of what happens in our residential zones. And they are intended for residents, full-time residents, or even seasonal residents, but that's the purpose of them, is not for tourist accommodations. Tourist accommodations are a different thing, and I think it's a real shame. I actually held a forum here in my last year in office with a number of the commercial tourist operators in the community, and a number of them are no longer in business, and a number of them have sold since. And so there we have an inn that had, I don't know, 14 rooms or so, that's now shut down. We had another hotel across from the school, which is now going to be long-term housing, which is great, but it was a hotel. It was always intended as a hotel, and now that's no longer available. So yes, I recognize that we do need accommodations for our tourists. I know tourism is extremely important to our community, but it has a place outside of our residential zones, in my opinion.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Fullerton.
Through the chair, I just wanted to ask you if you would repeat the sources you have for data. I wasn't really clear on that part.
Certainly. We're between license agreements, but normally we get regular lifts of the tourist accommodations database directly from Nova Scotia Tourism. And so we have a data sharing agreement in place, and they just provide us the database, and we get a listing of all of them in town, and we can monitor them that way. And that answers your question.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Babineau.
through the chair, not so much a question because they actually were all answered, but I thank you, first of all, very comprehensive. And I'll echo a lot of the sentiments that have already kind of been said about maybe it kind of seems like this, oh God, I keep doing this. Stop talking with my hands. About maybe moving this conversation forward. I guess to Trevor's earlier point though, about perhaps waiting for some data that's currently ongoing, both the market housing and the cultural tourism study. Is that something that we would maybe want to wait for just in case that helps better inform us?
Personally, I think for whatever reason, we've been moving at a snail's pace on this very issue for the last 3 years. Mahone Bay jumped out of the gate and got a new bylaw in place. Halifax was the first out of the gate. Then once they set the example and were allowed, many others around Nova Scotia are now currently reviewing their bylaws. So I'd hate to see us defer it too much further. I think there are a few things. I mean, the LUB and MPS amendments will take months. So, I mean, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but there maybe are a few things we can do on, on this list that might be able to help for the short term, but I think it's something we should start at least the process. What I think the next step would be is we've all hit a lot of points around the table. Trevor's been there taking notes. Kayla's been taking notes. So maybe if we could get a motion that would direct staff to bring back a report answering and some of the things that were brought up here tonight with some options, clear options on how to proceed next and not let this. I'm scared if we don't keep moving forward, this will be put on a shelf again for months, and that's what I'm scared of. So I think we can start the process. We can start, because we're going to have to review the LUB and MPS anyways, because there's a number of issues in that document, those documents that we want to revise anyways. So I think we should start that process at the very least, ASAP, and along with maybe a more, a more detailed report now, knowing how most of us, I guess, feel, and come back to council. But that's just my thoughts. Does anyone else have anything? Councillor Strong?
Yeah, this is just it's a sober thing, because when I think all of us experienced just less than 12 months ago going door to door, there are a lot of, I don't know why they're not showing up, but it's really sad how many are not occupied by people, full-time residents of the town. And in a time when we need housing for volunteer firefighters and people that work in the community, it's critical, I think. I mean, the short-term rentals are not voting on anything. They're not coming and attending these meetings. They're not listening. They're not doing the heavy lifting that the rest of us are doing. So I do agree that whatever we can do to get going is important. And that next step, I guess, would be the report.
Thank you. Councillor Doffey?
I've been here through the chair, doing a little speech in my head and trying to calm down as I keep talking to myself. I think we've batted this issue around enough. Trevor, you did a great report. But it's time now to actually start to put things in place. I know we can't go back to the past, but I am reminded by a little song from Sesame Street. Who are the people in your neighborhood? And I feel if we keep going down this path, we're not going to know the people in our neighborhood because we're not going to have people there. They're going to come and then they're going to leave. And that's not going to help us. It's not going to help us at all. So I think time is now. We start to implement stuff before Lunenburg's gone, period.
Anybody else have any comments? Just to add on Councillor Strong, I was shocked for someone that went door to door 2 summers in a row. I will say I was shocked, especially in Old Town, the amount of houses I knocked on and people coming to the door and saying, hey, like, that's great, but I can't vote. I'm just staying here for 3 days. And I had no idea, say that house was a VRBO or Airbnb or whatever and they were like, there was 2 or 3 on every block. in the core part of Old Town, which blew my mind. I had no idea, right? So it's not hard to figure out how many there is, and it might actually take, some door knocking by some people. Maybe some of us will step up and go door to door. We've done it recently. But again, I think if we put in rules in place, we have to get the word out and request people to let us know what's going on next to them. Because trust me, everybody knows what their neighbor's doing. I mean, everybody knows if they actually have a neighbor or not. And as much as it would be great to see everybody live here 12 months of the year, most of our seasonal residents, when they are here, the seasons they're here, contribute greatly to the community. They join volunteer groups, they help at organizations, they get involved, so they become part of our community the same as the rest of us. It's the STR folks that are here for 3 days, then they move out, and then another group for 3 days. They don't contribute a thing except for what they spend for the 3 days they're here. And again, they're not here for 6 months of the year in the winter. That's eventually going to erode us to nothing. So do we want to make a motion to move to the next step? Deputy Mayor?
So I mean, I would make a motion just to get things going. I guess we're going to talk and then, further on about prioritizing and potential amendments to the MPS and LUB. So I guess, assuming that there's going to be further discussion on that, and we'll be looking at further amendments. I guess in the interim, I would just move that staff work on what amendments might look like to the MPS, if they are needed in the MPS, and the LUB, I'm not sure, as their next steps suggest, to further restrict STRs by limiting them to primary residences, by limiting them to residential zones and or commercial zones, sorry, and commercial use zones, and I guess first of all, and then whether or not a licensing bylaw or a report on the idea of instituting a short-term rental business licensing bylaw and its value. I'd leave the others till for later, but those three, as mentioned in the next steps, is by motion of moving forward.
Okay, there's a motion made. Kayla, do you have it there in front of you? The whole motion? Do you want to read it out?
Since I did such a wonderful job.
So that staff bring back a report on what amendments might look like to the MPS and LUB as the next steps as suggested in the presented report to restrict STRs by limiting to primary residences, commercial use zones, and the merits of a potential licensing bylaw.
It's been moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Daphne. Any further discussion or question on the motion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, motion carried unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much, staff, for putting together that report. Thank you. So next on our agenda is 8.2 noise bylaw amendments. We have Shania and Kayla, I guess, presenting here. So who's going first?
Yeah, so Shania and I are gonna partner up on this a little bit. I'll just give a brief overview and then we're both here to answer questions. As you know, Shania is our enforcement officer and boots on the ground, so operational, and I'm just here to help with the legislation part. So for tonight, as noted, we present you for discussion an amended noise bylaw. So in reviewing this bylaw, the current bylaw, especially section 3, has some vague wording that's made it difficult to enforce or defend when challenged. With summer approaching, we're hoping to have clear definitions and standards in place so we can respond to these noise complaints fairly and consistently. There's a table in the report that highlights the main changes that we're proposing, but in short, we're looking to, as I just mentioned, clearly define what qualifies as excessive or disruptive noise, streamline exemption requests, allowing the CAO to approve some of those requests, so the shorter ones and then longer ones. The shorter ones would be the firework requests that we see sometimes, or sometimes film permit noise requests. So that would streamline that process a little bit, adding a little bit of clarity to who enforces the bylaw. So the current bylaw was written when we didn't have a bylaw enforcement officer, so we only relied on our CMP. That's not to say that we're replacing our CMP services if needed. They are still there to help us, especially when it extends to threatening or criminal behavior. The intent there is just to add a bit more clarity that yes, we have a bylaw enforcement officer and this is what they can do with this bylaw. And then we're also introducing progressive fines to help deter repeat violations. So right now we only have the one that's a $230, I believe, or something like that. So then the second fine would go up to $500. So with that, since this is a committee of the whole, we're hoping council can take this opportunity to go through the bylaw and suggest any edits, questions, thoughts, ideas, and Shania and I are here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Anyone have any comments to get this going? Councillor Greig.
Yeah, not really any questions per se, but I mean, my comment is, reading through this and looking at what the current bylaw states and then the proposed updates, I think, they're really, really solid updates, that makes it a lot more definitive, and they're just kind of takes out the gray area. So, I'm definitely, quite in favor of making this a little bit more clear, easier to understand for all residents. So I think, in my opinion, it was a good job, well done here.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Strong.
Okay, I'm happy to see this noise bylaw come back. I think I spoke when it was on the agenda at a previous council saying it's too broad, it's too vague, but nobody was listening to me because I wasn't a councillor. So here I am, a councillor. I have a few questions. One thing that we get is the communications part. So I am concerned about the CAO handling activities under 14 days. But then I do see that there will be, okay, so that's really good. Excellent idea. It's a built-in advertising of what's happened. So under the new enforcement, it allows officers to act as witnesses, protecting complainant confidentiality, stronger legal support for court cases. So do they go to court?
Yes, so when you serve a summary offense ticket, it does go right to court, where then you have to plead your case. So yeah, having me as a witness keeps the complainant's confidentiality. So then there's no issues between the residents.
Hopefully we won't have to go to court. Then, okay, I have a little picky thing here, and it's with the windows closed. In the summer, we really do like to have our windows open. So is this bylaw is not going to be effective if I have to take the mitigating step of closing my window? And I had a personal experience a few years ago where this was before the last bylaw, and anyway, it was an escalating situation with the RCMP coming one night, which was not a very fun thing. If I'd been told to close my windows, I think a very emotional situation would have been made worse. I think we are allowed to enjoy our house with our windows open, so I'd like to see that go away. I think it's more about the enjoyment of another person's property. And I might want to be out on my deck when my neighbor is yelling about whatever it was he was yelling about 4 years ago or 5 years ago. So, okay. Do we have noise produced by pedestrian crossing signals? Do we need that in there? It would be
my understanding is we don't. Tyson might know. No, so Tyson's saying no. But I guess if it's in there now, like down the road, if we were to add.
So that's just an optimistic statement. And then the penalties are good, I think. just enough that someone won't probably pursue it to court and just pay the fine, which is what you always want. And so those are my comments. I think it's moving in the right direction, but I'd like to see I'd like to be able to have my windows open in the summer and object to my neighbor screaming at me.
Anybody else? Counselor Fullerton.
Through the chair, just in terms of the sound with crossing signals and traffic signals and so on, those are present in HRM. And so, yeah, and I think that it doesn't harm us to put that in there for future use. We don't use them now, but if we do, yeah, that's my only comment with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor.
Happens when I don't get a hard copy. I don't have notes written all over it. So it's harder to find my questions in a pinch. I was curious to hear what Councillor Strong said about the CAO's approval for short term. My issue was was communication, and so it may have been mitigated somehow because if it's going on and council doesn't know about it and we still get the complaints, I think there needs to be provision to ensure that council's informed whenever there's a noise exemption, provide it. But if it's, most of them are basically a rubber stamp kind of a decision of council, but the beauty of them coming before council for me had always been, then we know what's going on. And, we're the boots on the ground for the community complaints often too. So couldn't find where that's covered, but Kayla, are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, so in section 8.4 with the public notice and input requirements. So even under the CAO approved one, we have that any exemption would still has to be posted on our social media channels and our official website. So that could internally also give council an update via email as well. But we would, if we were, if the CAO had approved a fireworks exemption, that would go out and we would advertise ahead to let people know.
So I'm glad you spoke to that specifically because that's another issue I have with communication in general that I think we need to address in all other matters. But because we're talking about this bylaw in particular, I would like to see the communication channels be broadened. To say and for now until we have a strong communication policy in place, we could say something like and any other appropriate communication channels. But definitely down the line, I would like to see, an opt-in email stream for residents to have offered to them so that they can be notified when things happen. I'd like to see us move away from just too much reliance on social media and not for noise exemptions, but for other notifications of things. So for example, the notifications that would be required to approve the amendment to this bylaw, if we could use a mail out. It doesn't have to be something fancy, doesn't have to be addressed mail. We all know from our campaigning, or a number of us do, that it's not that expensive to do just general flyers in everyone's mailbox. So when it's something that we want to make sure the whole community is aware of, like bylaw amendments and so on, I think these are other things we need to look into down the road. So just in the process of amending these, just providing for the idea of other communication channels being available is something I hope we could amend to provide for. There's one other thing. Sorry, I'll have to think about what the other things were for a moment. Thanks.
Councillor Daphne.
Through the chair. In the meantime, I know through my job, we work with the movie industry, and sometimes things come up rather on short notice due to weather or whatever. So if there is a noise exemption and it's only given like a day or two, can we do like a door knock or something like that? Is that possible?
So my understanding too, there's also mechanisms in place, and Trevor would be the best person, sorry, Trevor, if you're comfortable, but under our film permit policy, we also have like communication standards. So if there was filming, they have to get a film permit policy, and under that, there's communications that have to go out through that. So I think we'd be covered under a lot of those other things. Same with special events and.
The other thing through the chair is the enforcement at night. Are we expecting Shania, I don't know, 1 o'clock at night to go enforce whatever is happening by herself? Or is this an automatic RCMP call or whatever? Because honestly, I personally, and you might feel different, I don't feel comfortable putting Shania in that position.
Yeah, so safety is number one for me, both for the residents and myself. Normally with my noise complaints in the past, I'm hearing about them the day after. I have yet to get a call during the night. But if I was to, especially during the nighttime, it would be an instant call to the RCMP. Anything that escalates into a criminal offense, say if it's threatening, yelling and screaming, that's not something for me to go and knock on a door and get involved in. It's immediate to the RCMP. I have great relations with the RCMP, and they've treated me great, and they're always there to support me when I need it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Deputy Mayor, did you find your last one there?
At least one more. I wondered about the 100 feet, 30 meter rule, and how that, because I'd been through revisions before of this bylaw, and we went through a whole terribly long process about decibels and trying to find the appropriate decibels, and it ended up being a dog chasing their tail, and we never did arrive at what was. So I'm just wondering, is this kind of a new standard that's been adopted elsewhere, or it seems reasonable to me, but just asking where it might have come from.
I think with the 100 feet, we just kind of wanted it measurable. The decibel is hard to actually enforce, especially with background noises. It's not always accurate. So using the distance, you'll see past the 100 feet, it says, or next dwelling unit. So that if it's not next to a dwelling unit, we have that measurable of 100 feet that we're hearing this noise, and then I can then enforce it. It's just backing again for court and legal reasons.
Thank you. Anything else?
Well, there was another, but I'm not sure if I can find the reference here, but it's out of concern too, because my previous experience as well with this bylaw was not necessarily residential, but it was the friction between industrial use and residential. We actually had a whole process of a mediator involved in some incidences, because there was nothing in the bylaw that could address the obvious conflict between what was an industrial use and the neighboring residents' enjoyment of their home, when there were loud noises, which were typically appropriate for the operator. And I'm not sure if there is a way to improve upon that, or to help alleviate that potential friction in here. I noticed there's a lot of this is okay's kind of things listed. But again, the challenge with providing a list, I think that we do have the appropriate language that it's not limited to in there, but just, I guess, just a concern that may be one that can't be addressed, but wonder if this had come up in the discussion of the amendment.
So section 7, as we have there, I think what we were primarily trying to look at was like restaurants and, you know, when pubs had live music and stuff like that. But I think we could definitely add another section in there that would capture more of that industrial. So I think we would just flush out some wording there and bring that forward to council.
It could go under waterfront operations.
Yeah, I guess most of my comments have been covered. Safety of staff I had as number one. So we want to make sure we don't put our bylaw officer at any kind of harm's way. So, you know, most likely if you get a noise complaint after the 11 p.m. hour, it's not going to be a sensible response on the other end. So I'm glad to hear that that's definitely an RCMP call. I like the time restricted activities. So that basically alleviate and the point 7 with the restaurants and the pubs. And we do have some businesses that operate with some entertainment. Some are outdoors only. So I think 7 to 11 is quite reasonable, quite frankly, if people want to have entertainment on their patio of a business, and as long as it's shut down by 11, I think that's quite reasonable. I think that we want to be very aware of the working waterfront. Everybody wants a working waterfront until they actually know what a working waterfront is. And then nobody wants a working waterfront, right? So a working waterfront means that boats get unloaded at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes. And that has to be totally acceptable. So if you want to open up a short-term rental on Blue Nose Drive across from some of them wharves, maybe tell your guests that there might be an odd inconvenience, but that's called working in Lunenburg. It's a working waterfront. So I'm glad they're exempt in there. And then lastly, the deputy mayor and I and the CAO talked quite a bit today about communication. And what we had suggested was if we feel when this is ready to go to first reading, and if it's prepared around the same time we have our budget schedule finalized, which is going to be finalized very soon, we should do a newsletter, first one in a long time. And it's nothing too fancy, but send it out in the mail, in everybody's mailbox with this, the budget schedule, if there's a few other things that come up, and just show the people that we are listening, we are hearing, and that would be step 1 of maybe something we can continue down the road when some staffing positions get put in place. But again, those are my only comments. I have no problem with the bylaw. It's definitely a lot clearer than it was, and it gives us a lot more teeth for some incidents that have been occurring in the town recently, that we can now deal with it. And, you know, and that's the thing. If we have these in place and it's a continuing problem, then we should be dealing with it and dealing with it quickly. And if it means enforcement, if it means going to court, then if we have this here, we can go to court. So I want to thank staff again for coming back with this, because it's a heck of a lot clearer than their last one. So thank you. Is anybody prepared to move this with some amendments to first reading? Moved by Councillor Babineau. Anyone? Seconded by Councillor Fullerton. Any further discussion or question on the motion? Deputy Mayor.
Just the question would be, I guess it's as it can be made available. So I don't know at what point, what meeting, yeah. That needs
Again,
to
we
be-
have a quick turnaround with our April 8th going out. So our intent would to have this come back for April 22nd for first reading. And the CAO and I had spoken earlier about that communication and putting that out. So making sure that aligns and giving people time to understand the schedule and second reading, public hearing. So April 22nd.
Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So there's a motion with a seconder. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed? Motion carried unanimous. So thank you very much once again, staff, for putting that together. It was a great document. Now we'll move on to 8.3, prioritizing the motion action list. Talking about a dance. Okay, so Kayla, I guess you're up.
Yeah, thanks again. So tonight we're asking if in this committee, the whole discussion, that council could review and provide some direction on the motion action list. So it's in the report, but I'll just give a brief summary of what the list is. So this list was created in 2023 as a way to help track council motions and progress on key initiatives. Before the election, it was regularly included in the public agenda packages, so council and the public could easily follow and understand items and their progress. After the election, we paused including this in the public agenda to give this council some time to take a look at the list and start to prioritize that and establish its priorities, recognizing that many of the items are the previous council's actions. So at this point, we've updated the list and included some staff recommendations to help guide the discussion. There's a total of 27 items and we've grouped them into 4 categories, as you can see. So there's priority items that we have established some target dates. There's items that we have deemed to be a priority, but we just need a little bit more time or more information before we can set those dates. Then we have set aside low or no priority items from previous council. And then there are some items as a staff we reviewed and think they could potentially be removed if council agrees. So tonight we're looking for feedback on, are these priorities and timelines realistic to council? Are there other items council would like to see moved up? So something that we might have not identified necessarily as a priority, but council would like to see as a high priority. And then are there items that councillors no longer interested in pursuing? So the intent of this discussion is really about setting a clear and coordinated path forward that reflects both council's priorities and what's realistic in terms of timeline and prioritization. So this is here for council's review and I leave it to you folks.
Thank you. So you've all had the document. Who would like to kick it off? Councillor Strong.
Thank you for this. It's actually really, really helpful looking in me trying to figure out what my priorities are. But I will say that I think we're still incomplete in what our priorities are. So I like that you're saying that this will give us time to establish our priorities. A couple of questions, or I guess low or no priority items for previous council. I don't want to say that they are low, but I'm wondering if there's been any movement on the provincial municipality organization on property standards, dangerous and unsightly premises, because I believe that that was on their agenda last year at the same time it was on ours, because the MGA is not really clear on what is unsightly. So I'm wondering if somebody could follow that up with them. And the municipal archive, I think it's important that we get that stuff out of the damp area on the 3rd floor. If it's still damp, I don't know anything about it, but at least to get the stuff out of there so that it doesn't get damaged is still a priority for me. I'll probably pop back in again.
Deputy Mayor Ernst had said that even though he wasn't reoffering, he would volunteer to help get that stuff out of there. So maybe we can contact him and see if he still has interest in helping put that together, because he moved this and got it on the priority list. And he wasn't, when he wasn't reoffering, and he said he would definitely help. So maybe we can reach out to him, and because that's his thing. I mean, he's really good at archiving things and all those types of things. So maybe someone can reach out to Stephen.
Yeah, I think the intent here is, now that this has been identified as a priority of council, we can work together as staff and try to come up with a plan and then put that. The intent here is based on council's direction too. We can update like the status and the progress in that list too. And then we're going to bring it back to start putting it back on the council agenda. So you folks can kind of take a look and see what plan is in place for that. And then based on that, if council wants more information on what we're suggesting, that could be a report or a request or just a request of more information. So all that to say, note it and we'll look at a plan.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Deputy Mayor.
I will have a number as well again, but I'll get started with the one on the, I agree with regard to the municipal archive, by the way. I think too that it's, I wouldn't like to see this drop off. I know it's a long-term thing, but yeah, to keep it on our radar, I think is important. Also listed on that low or no priority item or list is the community grants policy amendment. If I understand it correctly, the amendment that was being requested was specific to keeping a certain amount, allocating exclusively for qualifying student applicants. And I think if I'm understanding the intent correctly, it was so that monies weren't all expended at the time of budget and that there was some allowed. And I know that that was done without the policy amendment in the past, in the last budget cycle. So I think that could easily be done again by, the action of council. What was more concerning to me about the community grants, how the decisions were made, did not seem to be part of the policy. It was how staff were requested by the past council to come up with a very complicated criteria. And I don't know if that was just through a council direction or if it was part of the policy. But that part of the decision-making process with regards to community grants, I found problematic. So I guess I'm just wondering if it's not part of the policy, we can just do it the way we'd like to anyway this year. But if it's part of the policy, then I do think we need to make some amendments. So I don't know if you can who can speak to that.
So again, with the evaluation of last year, I think that was presented as a request for decision. So I believe the intent this year would be to follow the policy.
Yeah, but within the policy, it's actually the requirements for evaluation of the different grant proposals isn't that rigid, so there'd be some flexibility there basically for this council to work through it. And it can look a little bit different than last year.
That we would amend for next year. So again, the policy amendments are still valid, and if council wants to pursue that, absolutely. Just right now, where we're at in stage of intake period, it wouldn't happen for this year. Again, all that to say as well, the $2,500 for youth programming is not to say that it couldn't happen under the current policy.
To Mark's point, I think that there is some flexibility and that the evaluation of the various grant applications is a bit of an operational process and one that there's flexibility in. So council can review the different applications and make decisions based on the applications, basically.
No, I just thank you. I think that's what I wasn't sure where it had come from in practice in the last year, just watching it unfold. I thought that it was, better left with the broader criteria that seemed to be in the policy anyway. And I don't disagree that it's helpful to keep a little bit of a cushion for those potential grant applicants that things occur throughout the fiscal year that aren't envisioned during budget time, and we'd like to be able to have the opportunity to support youth or other people representing the town or whatever later on in the year. So I think that's helpful, and I know that has been put into practice in past years. So I would think we would do that without the necessary amendment. So I guess keeping it on low priority is, I guess, where what I'm getting to, is having understood it correctly, I believe. So thanks.
Anybody else at this time? Councillor Babineau?
All right, I'm going to put my hands down here so that I stop hitting the microphone. So just wanted to quickly mention, I love the idea of putting this back into the agenda package going forward, with like staff updates on it. I did want to quickly touch on the UARB amendment request from ABCO, in an interesting timing thing. About 2 days before we got this agenda package, someone at ABCO approached me about this very request. And I have indicated to them they should either email myself or Marvin to kind of kickstart this process again, but they are interested in seeing this move forward. I think there might have been a little bit of crossed wires given, the election and whatnot, because I think they were waiting for a response from us, and it looks like we were waiting for a response from them. So I personally would like to see this not be removed, because I do know that is still of interest to ABCO. So.
Thank you. Councillor Fullerton.
Thank you. Yes, I love this. This is great to have all of these, the dates of the original requests, and the priorities. I think are somewhat fluid in that. What I noticed about some of these items is that a couple of them I feel could be grouped, and there's stuff in here about housing, and as we move forward with some of the presentations that have been made to council, maybe we could consider them as a comprehensive package. And then that would allow us to remove some stuff off the list all at once. And the same thing with the street use and parking and traffic study. There were 4 or 5 items that related to streets and parking and so on that would be great. And especially those that are budget items. That'd be great if we could look at them all together. And even though some of them are sort of identified as not priorities so much as the others, like if we can, if it's not too much, to put all that stuff together and have a look at it so that we can get it done.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Daphne.
Through the chair, I just want to talk about the archive for a minute. It's one of my dreams, I guess you'd say, to have one central place that we could have a history of Lunenburg, a Lunenburg bump, an ox yoke, spot on UNESCO, prominent Lunenburgers. I was reminded at a meeting this week, I don't have to be reminded because I know, but we have a very special place here in Lunenburg. And I think we should do it justice by having one centralized location where we can tell our story. And as more of us get older and pass on, we're losing things. I know, having lost my mom, I kick myself because she was a great baker and I should have paid attention more. How many people know about the Flying Dutchman? Things like that. So that's a dream of mine, and maybe I'll win the lottery and I'll give the town a whole bunch of money. But I think somewhere down the road, that would be a great idea. Thanks.
That's similar to my dream of Parks Canada eventually having UNESCO interpretive center here in town. So we'll both have to keep dreaming, I think, for the short term anyways. Councillor Strong.
I just have one thing, since I'm following this closely. I'm wondering if it's appropriate to have the Cornwallis Street renaming at the next committee of the whole discussion meeting. I'm very mindful of how things can go sideways. But more importantly, because we're also going to be hearing at some time in May about the motion, Mark, so help me here with this, for monuments. Yeah. So, and I think that if that proceeds, I think there would be more professional guidance on the street name issues. Maybe at the same time, I'm just cautious of putting it on committee of the whole without having some kind of a strategy in place. And I think that what Mark is working on may dovetail into that whole discussion.
Yeah, sorry, and just to respond to that too, as far from a staff perspective, I do agree. I think especially as far as engagement and community engagement with the Mi'kmaq community, that could fit into a few different things, that in particular, and one or two other initiatives, interpretive panels, that kind of thing. So,
Deputy Mayor?
I just further to that point as well. It was concerning to me that there was so little around education and about learning through Truth and Reconciliation why we would even be talking about this. So I think we need to, go further back. Councillor Strong and I attended a blanket exercise ceremony on the weekend, which was incredibly enlightening. It's something I think everyone should do because it is an important education on Indigenous history and how little we know and how much is erased or changed or was never told. And so the renaming of the street is like the end game. We have a path we need to go, and not just our council needs to go, our community needs to go to understand the significance of doing that. And that whole thing, I thought, was missing from the previous attempt, well-intentioned as it may have been. So it's not that I don't think it's a priority. I think it is very much a priority. I just think that we need more time to determine how we approach it. And I'm not sure that we're there yet as far as moving ahead with further discussion right now.
Yeah, I think waiting for Mark's or staff's report on the Parks Canada thing is important, and hearing from the allies. Just as we're sitting here, I'm hearing from my friend Dr. Francis, who's in Mexico right now, saying, don't forget to deal with this. But we are identifying allies in the province, and I think it's time to start listening. And I have a feeling that application may start that process, or I have hopes, just like you have hopes about anyway, that's it for me.
You, Mayor?
And it just, maybe so it doesn't get forgotten. I mean, maybe a report from staff to our next COW would simply say something about that, that we want to tackle this in a very thoughtful and process.
So that is the intent of the next one, not to have it fully fleshed out, just as a reminder to act on council's previous motion to say, this is where we're at. Here's some ideas of where we could get there. And let's take a beat and pause and look at our different options. So starting to identify. So the intent of coming forward in any future committee, the whole discussions is not to say, this is it, we have a new name, let's go. It's really taking that pause back to say, here's how we got here. Here are some options to look at before we get to the next destination.
Great. Anything else? I have a few things, but first, this was an oversight on my behalf earlier tonight. I meant to mention that, Mark, I guess we can remove the term interim from below your name. So welcome aboard as a full-time employee with the town of Lunenburg. And we also, Laura Gresley is also, we're removing the interim term from her title as well. So again, congratulations, well-deserved, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. So thank you, Mark. So I have a few comments on it. I just think going down through the priority items, I think basically everything on the priority items we have to leave there and work on them as staff can get get them done and get to where we can make a decision or recommendations, or at least to the committee of the whole point so we can discuss it more thoroughly. I think we've discussed the LUB and MPS amendments below to death on multiple occasions. So I think that they should probably be moved up to priority items as well. We all know that that's a long process. It's probably a 6 to 9 month process. So I think we should get on that, as well. And I think a few of the little things like Councillor Fullerton mentioned, the things that came out of the traffic study that we actually think might be doable, like reducing speed limits and traffic and parking budget considerations. I think those are things that we could move up to things that we might even be able to tackle some of them this year. So I'd like to see us move forward in that manner personally. I do agree the community grants policy, if that can be tweaked or we can actually we do have some leeway on there. I'm glad to hear that because last year I wasn't excited over how it went down. And again, the items that are recommended for removal, except for the NSUARB one that Councillor Babineau had brought up that ABCO is still very interested in. The other 4 items or 5 items, in my opinion, could probably be removed from that list altogether, where the one that to me had some importance was the ICOMOS response, and that's completed, I was told. So sent that off and away we go and wait for a response. So up to that point, that's what I saw going down through the list, but that's just my opinion. But, I think it is good that we remove some, move some up, tackle some as some of the easier ones that we can get at quickly. We should tackle. We should talk to the RCMP about the speed limit issue. That is one that we all heard going door to door. So I think that's something we can do at a very low cost to the community and show that we're moving forward in some of these issues. So that's what I got from the list. What's coming?
Oh.
There's a report coming on speed limit reductions tomorrow for the April 8th meeting. So that's great. So again, we are tackling some of the low-hanging fruit and we can move from there. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks. Although you said we've talked to death on LEB and MPS amendments, I just like you said, I would like to see that prioritized a bit higher as 1 as opposed to 2. Although I'm mindful that it, as also has been stated, it is a very long process to make any amendments. I do think there are multiple amendments, so I think a wholesale review of them is in order. And I would just look for direction from staff as to how that happens, and how the committees are involved in that process, how a planning advisory committee is involved, and if we need to refer anything there. In the interim, however, there are the amendment with respect to Salt Meadows subdivision. I would strongly recommend that amendment be tackled independently if need be, because I don't think another 9 months to a year is fair to have them wait. And so the issues that concern that subdivision, I would like to see tackled as quickly as possible.
Agreed. I just came from that subdivision at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and they're improving the outside a bit. Like the garbage isn't as bad, but like just some of the cosmetic stuff with the mound of dirt and the other things that are there. And then it looks like on garbage day, some things got away from them. So in the neighbors on the right and the neighbors on the left, there's looks like blue bag items, to be honest, everywheres. And again, I don't know what we can tackle in that area, but I think the sooner we can get something in front of us, I think we've all made a commitment to those residents that we're going to review this and do something for them. So I think whatever we can do should be done. So Trevor, do you have any great suggestions?
I don't know about great, Your Worship, but I'll give it a try here. So just a reminder, as you know, I've been on the ground floor of the issues up there in Salt Meadows since they first arose. I remember McDonald and myself up there one, I think it was fall afternoon, but anyway, or morning. I just want to remind you as a group that any amendments that we bring forward, of course, won't affect the properties in question. They are grandfathered. They're covered by the existing bylaws. So I just wanted to clear that up right away. With respect to the LUB, I'm going to tackle the wider issue and then I'll circle back to Salt Meadows if you don't mind. In section 6.6 of the MPS, two policies exist. Policies 620 and 621. And I'll read them to you because I think it lays the groundwork for these amendments. Policy 620 states that council shall initiate a brief housekeeping review of this municipal planning strategy within 2 years of its adoption. The intent of this review is to solely identify errors and omissions. We did not complete that task. Policy 621. Council shall initiate a review of this municipal planning strategy following the 5-year review of the comprehensive community plan. The intent of this review is to align the municipal planning strategy with any new priorities and actions arising from the comprehensive community plan review. We've not completed that either, and we are due for it. So I think there's some wider issues there with respect to perhaps the standing of the CCP at this moment in time, the priorities of this council, et cetera. I won't cover those, but I will suggest that a lot of these LUB changes are probably most efficiently, to the point made, I forget which councillor made it, but grouping these together for efficiency could be made as part of that process, that 5-year review process, and we would bring them forward as a single package for review by council. But that leaves the, we have a long list of things that would fall under 620 up on the 3rd floor. You're welcome to come up and have a look at it someday. But there are a number of any new planning document that's first being vetted. It's inevitable. There's a number of things that need to be changed because they just don't work when as intended. So that would be our brief, I think, response to that. With respect to Salt Meadows or any of these items, we work at your discretion. So if you want to advance Salt Meadows in advance of these other items, staff will, of course, accommodate that request. It may be advisable to include those in a more holistic look at the MPS and the LUB to ensure that we're tackling all the issues where this could take place, or there may be other issues, but certainly it could be advanced separately from these other items.
Thank you. My question would be on a shorter notice, because I know how long these take to change. It's not quick. Is there anything we can do in that area at this point with some of the things that are remaining that seems to most people that the development just isn't done. They just walked away and left it as is. Like I thought, like it was supposed to be landscaped to a certain degree. The temporary telephone pole is now there still 3 years later. Like, is there any way we can force that issue on the developer?
Yes, and well spotted. He is not completed. He is deficient in a number of items that he is required to complete as per his development permit. Primarily being the driveway and landscaping in the front yard. He to date couldn't do that in the fall. He missed the asphalt plant. Of course, the asphalt plants are just opening back up. So as soon as we have good asphalt available, I suspect Shania and I might pay a visit to the property in question.
Thank you very much, because that's definitely a going concern, as you all know, to the residents over in that area. So thank you. Are there any other comments from around the table? If there aren't any, do we need a motion to proceed? Okay, Deputy Mayor.
Well, I know it was a point of concern from some people in the public about the response to ICOMOS. And I'm wondering if we can, if not the specific response, just speak to that in public session somehow so that it's understood how the concerns were addressed by staff.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. And also, and just to note, I mean, that whole issue as well, or it's a relationship really, you know, with the organization. So it's a bit ongoing as well. So I actually, staff, we do plan on meeting and talking a little bit about it as well. So as an ongoing thing. So I think it's something that we could certainly, report on, you know, in a public setting and, how things are going, how that response in particular, relates to their concerns about state of conservation, and that makes sense.
You, Counselor Strong, do you have something else? Okay. Oh,
Sorry. There's just a couple of things on there that would be great if we had a little direction on. One being the streets bylaw review. So that was one that we didn't necessarily internally have a priority set. So just the question of the May 14th, 2024 motion to review all bylaws and policies governing town streets, including street right-of-ways. Is this something this council has an appetite to pursue?
I don't. It seemed really broad and it wasn't under, and, you know, maybe if I had been present to understand the intent, but it seems like it's not particularly relevant to our concerns or my concerns at this point in time. So I would be fine with letting that one go.
I agree. I think some of these bylaw reviews might have came by the direction of senior staff at the time, and things have changed. So, you know, I don't think that's a priority for me either. Councillor Babineau?
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask if you guys had enough from us in terms of looking for direction on specific items. So I would agree, streets bylaw for me, the review I wrote down, just no. And then also the pest control one as well. It doesn't seem particularly relevant to me at this time.
And then one I know Councillor Strong had mentioned, reaching out to municipal affairs about the ambiguous terms in the MGA about unsightly premises. They had reached out to us to say if we wanted to be a part of their working group, and that hasn't escalated. That being said, Shania and I have spoken about this, and Shania doesn't get a whole lot of complaints about this. So whether council wants to actively pursue this policy that would accompany the MGA, or just consider this a low priority. We've agreed it doesn't hurt to have a policy that would clearly outline the enforcement and how we operationalize the MGA. So having our own accompanying policy definitely doesn't hurt. I think it'd be a good thing. Just it hasn't been identified as a priority we need right now from the staff perspective.
I'll speak to that. I'm always a fan. Yeah, ask a lawyer what they think about things. Less is more. I don't like bylaws. I really don't. They're more entertaining than they are actually effective. I think a policy might be good, but it should stick with the real concerns, which are drought, wildfire, all of these things that we have recognized with climate change. I know that the lawn naturalization in Toronto and the City of London, it was driven by the fact that they were rationing water basically at one point in time. And, you know, it didn't really, you know, so, but we didn't even address that in ours, which was, you know, why are we wasting water on lawns or something like that? Anyway, I think a positive policy addressing the benefits of, let's say, the environmental benefits of naturalization with some limited guidance, probably in the area of, it sounds silly, but telling people how long grass can grow and without it becoming a fire hazard or anything like that. Anyway, less is more as far as I'm concerned. If we're not getting a lot of calls on it, I don't know why we would spend a whole lot of time on it.
Just from where I sit, when this was a hot topic, I guess when I first got elected in the by-elections, it would be 19 months ago, 18 months ago, it was very hot topic. It was actually one of the first agenda items on the first meeting I ever ran. And I didn't think it was a big deal, but it is a big deal for those that live in areas of some law naturalization going on. It seems to be more of a concern to some than others. And I think the recommendation of creating our own bylaw actually came from one of our staff members, Bruce, because he didn't feel he had enough to really act on it. So he had to go through the MGA, through the Unsightly Premises Act, which was a little, little strict from what he wanted to do, but he had no other choice. So I think what we were trying to do is meet everybody in the middle. That didn't seem to go well at all, because I think we went from being too strict, quite frankly, to a bylaw that was too loose. So I think if we can find something somewhere in the middle, we might be able to move forward in a positive manner. But when anyone brought up any kind of a negotiation or any kind of halfway point during the last public session, it was met with big pushback from the few that seem to want it. So I don't know where to go with that, but this isn't going away. Another month from now, if we get some sun and heat, it's going to ramp up again. It was gone for 6 months, but that's because of our climate. And, personally, it doesn't affect me so much, but there are definitely some people that really, really are opposed to it, and some that are strongly feel they should be able to do whatever they want. I'm sort of in the middle. I feel if you want to live in a residential urbanized center in the middle of a town, and everybody wants to call us urban, well, there's not many urban centers that just allow anything goes, right? So I think we have to have some rules in place. What they are, I don't know, but I think maybe getting a committee together and coming back with some happy mediums might work. But for whatever reason, the last time we tried that, it just seemed to be driven in the one direction, and the other direction was either ignored or didn't feel they were being heard. So then when it came to a public meeting, that side really came out in full force, and I don't want to experience that again. It wasn't a pleasant meeting whatsoever, and I don't want us to, have ill will between neighbors like that created. So again, I don't know how high this should be, but trust me when I tell you we're going to be getting emails again in another 6 to 8 weeks' time in certain areas of town. So we should look at trying to find some kind of resolution here that staff can actually deal with it in a professional and timely manner, because I don't want to see neighbors dealing with it on their own, because that could end nasty. So I watch a show now on Friday nights called Fear Thy Neighbor, and that's why I'm okay with whatever's next week. But I'm just saying, like, we need to deal with it as much as none of us want to. It's something we have to get back on the table and look at some solution, I think.
I'll just add that I still feel that a policy is a much healthier approach than a bylaw, because people use it as a stick instead of thinking of it as a tool. And the deputy mayor commented on something when we had another issue before us, and that is neighborliness when we're making decisions about things in town. Maybe we need a good neighbor bylaw instead of, or some way to work it out between neighbors. If they have to get a mediator to do it, maybe they have to get a mediator, but why does it become a very political situation in the long run? I think we really do have to start thinking about our neighbors for their views, appreciating them, listening. But I don't know how we can make it happen through a bylaw, I think, unless it's public health or something that is, that's really appropriate, like the environment right now. I just don't see it going anywhere good. Maybe we should have neighborly meetings to try to get to it. Who knows?
Else? Councilor Fuller.
Just in terms of the naturalization of properties, I think that, a really good sort of reference point for us in that whole issue is safety. So, and when I come to the corner of two streets that intersect and I can't see cars coming up the street because vegetation is not being managed. You know, when we get into the safety of that situation, that becomes an easy point of reference in a policy or in a bylaw. That's all I wanted to add.
Agreed. Trevor?
We do have something called the corner vision triangle within the land use bylaw that regulates that exact scenario, but it can't hurt to be reiterated in a policy.
And I agree that a policy is always better than the bylaw, because a policy can be tweaked and changed much easier than a bylaw can. So that's another good thing. If you make a policy and you find out a month later that, boy, that was really bad to put that in there, you can take it out, whereas a bylaw is a much longer process. So, but I do think we need to look at reviewing a policy just of that nature, because I said, I don't think this has disappeared, but I could be wrong. So do you have enough to move forward, Kayla?
Yeah, so in the report, we have a recommendation there that committee of the whole recommend that council confirm the revised motion action list at a future regular meeting. So our intent now is probably for April 22nd to work with staff to revise based on everything that was discussed here. So we'll put in progress and status, and then council can confirm that. And after that, we'll start including it regularly in the public agenda packages, and staff will utilize it more as a tool that we can update progress and status. So if things start to move and change a little bit, if something's being delayed, it could be in there, and giving council an opportunity to ask questions, talk about it, because it's always on the public agenda.
Thank you. So I guess we'll move on to make a motion.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll make the motion in front of us. What Kayla just said, the committee of the whole recommend the council confirm the revised motion action list at a future regular meeting. I thought you made that.
Is that?
I can't make it.
So, so we'll bring forth a move that we staff bring forth a revised motion action list for approval of council at a future meeting.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Fullerton. Any further discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, motion carried unanimous. And now to our 8.4 information from our CAO Marvin. Music to my ears. Go ahead, Marvin.
Sorry about that. I want to update council on the status of the property at the end of, I guess it's called Upper Hall Street. And it's the property that Harbourview Haven has been looking at for the relocation of their new facility. And back in 2023, they had discussions with the town about that property, and an agreement was reached back then. And the town in September of 2023 declared that property surplus. And the Harbourview Haven made an offer to purchase it. But because of the process in securing provincial support and funding, there's a whole protocol of approvals that have to be received along the way. And the actual approval to purchase land is something like stage 6 of that protocol. They've reached that stage, and last week I received an agreement of purchase and sale from Harbourview Haven for the amount agreed upon back in 2023. And at that time in October of 23, council gave direction for the CAO to enter into the purchase and sale agreement when it was available. And so it's now available, and the closing date on that offer is tomorrow, April the 2nd. So it's my intention to sign that on behalf of the town, sign that agreement of purchase and sale, and then they can proceed taking ownership. I think I know closing is May 15th. And so we will go through our legal counsel and have that agreement finalized with Harbourview Haven as it stands. There are conditions around servicing services to the property line, and I've been out with Dyson and looked at. That's not a big issue for us because the servicing is almost to the property line now. And so it looks like we're good on that. And so we can finalize that deal, and Harbourview Haven can proceed on to the next stage of their process in going forward with that new facility.
Thank you very much. That's really good news. I guess that answers some of the questions we've been hearing the last little while at this meeting about whether Harbourview Haven is actually proceeding or not. I guess it is. And I'm really happy to hear that the closing date is May 15th. So that's my birthday. So that's an awesome gift. So again, that couldn't have been better news. So thank you so much for that. The last council was 100% on board when this came to them. This council has been supportive. So I think this is a great show of a community initiative to keep something so important and valuable to the community in our community and allow people to basically, spend their final years for the most part in the community they've lived in the majority of their lives for the most part. So again, I want to thank staff, especially for working with Harbourview Haven staff and the developers for getting to this point, because it's been a long process. But as people learn, especially when they get involved in government, is the wheels don't move real fast, but they move. So they finally got to this point. So again, thank you very much. So nothing else on the agenda. There's no notice of motions. There's no closed session. So a motion for adjournment is in order. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Hoffney. Sorry about that.
Through the chair, I just want to let everybody know that this weekend, Blue Nose Academy is hosting the under 14 girls basketball provincials. Games start at 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, ending at 7 p.m. Saturday night. Sunday games start at 8:30 and end at 5 p.m. Our Lunenburg team plays at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. on Saturday. And then if you're really energetic, 8:30 on Sunday morning. It's $5 entry fee or $10 for a weekend pass. So if you got some time, stop in and see some great ball. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything under number 9? Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Just because we have the opportunity, just congratulate the organizers of the Jennifer Collins Classic that happened on the weekend. It was a pretty phenomenal event. I think by all, I don't know if Mark incurred any incidences, but it was certainly very well attended and was very successful and certainly generated a lot of activity in the community. So it was a great event, and congratulations to the organizers.
Thank you. Yeah, that to go unsaid would have been wrong on our behalf. I spent 4 days at the rink, and a long time since I've done that. And I must say, to watch the 50-50 ticket sales, and the generosity of the people, to see people win like over $2,000, say, at one time and give it all back, is just amazing. It shows the community we live in. And on Friday night at the opening ceremony, I don't want to say a number because I don't know what our capacity of the rink is, but I'm sure we were at it or higher. I've never seen that many people at the arena. For a small community, I must say it's totally unbelievable what goes on there for 4 days. And they have a golf tournament coming up the 3rd week of May, I think it is, the 24th. So again, if anyone's interested in contributing or helping out, I'm sure if you contact the organizers, they're certainly always looking for volunteers. So thank you very much, Deputy Mayor, for bringing that forward, because it truly was an amazing, almost like a come home weekend. That's sort of what it's turned out. I had a player on my team come from Newfoundland, for example. So it's great. So if there's nothing else, There's no closed session. A motion for adjournment. Counselor Fullerton. Seconder. Second by Deputy Mayor. We're adjourned.